Okay, we're gonna call item 2, discussion and possible regarding proposed change and amendments to the regulation applicable to the vertical mixed-use building. Is the staff ready? Ann?
For purposes of getting us started for discussion, I'd like to make a motion. So we've got a motion to consider the VMU substitute that I passed out to everyone is in our backup, to send on to the full council with a recommendation. I understand we need to have some conversation, so I just want to put a motion out there to get us started. And I think that Councilmember Vela may have a amendment to that, which is acceptable to me if he wants to do that.
Thank you, Councilmember Kitchen. I do. It's and did y'all get a paper copy of the
Yeah.
motion? Okay.
Yeah.
And I believe that the clerk has it to throw up on the screen too for the public. But my motion would essentially limit compatibility to 100 feet only along the light rail corridors, which would be the orange and the blue line. And then it would also provide additional parking reductions, I believe to 25% of the current required parking in comparison to the current VMU reductions, which are 60%. And again, this would be only for properties that touch the orange and blue lines, with the idea that these are going to have very strong transit network backing them up, and also with the idea that we're going to be going to the feds and asking for a bunch of money to build those light rail lines. And I want to make sure that we send the message to the federal government that, we're serious about this plan. We're serious about housing along our light rail corridors. And hopefully that will, get our scores up for the plan a little bit more, and we'll be able to bring in some, additional funding for the project as it moves forward.
And so I accept that as a friendly amendment for the same reasons. I think that it's important for us to be increasing our density along those light rail corridors and relaxing compatibility in the way that Councilmember Vela has proposed is a good way to do that. I also think that it's really important that we maximize as much as we can the potential matching dollars from the federal government on the light rail lines, and taking immediate action now on the VMU ordinance would be a way to do that. And so thank you for that amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Kitchen.
Well, only because there's been a little bit of discussion, just to foreshadow. If Councilmember Kitchen's motion passes, which says you can only get VMU2 by making it a different zoning classification, which would allow for petition rights and the like. One thing to consider is whether a significant relaxing of compatibility makes it more or less likely that someone could ever prevail past a petition. But I'm certainly willing to consider it in that context, because I think it's not going to happen very often. But because I real strongly believe that we need to have increased density and units along the corridors to help with transit, probably not supporting the making it a different zoning classification, but making it so it's by right, but recognizing that if we're going to make it by right, we can't do as significant a change in compatibility as we might otherwise like to do, or we'll lose the votes to make it something that happens by right. So it seems as if the choice ultimately is going to be, do you let VMU2 happen by right with more limited relaxing of compatibility, because it happens by right, or do you make it a separate zoning classification, which means that potentially there's a challenge to all of them that any three council members could stop. And I think we're all trying to figure out which is the one that's going to have the greatest impact on new units. And that's what I'll be listening and trying to hear for, because I want whichever one of those options maximizes the additional units.
So could I, okay.
And I do, let me just ask the staff, do y'all have
Okay, go
a
ahead.
briefing that y'all want to make before? And I was wondering if we
That's
can make
fine.
that decision
That's fine.
afterwards. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sam Tedford, and I'm with the City of Austin Housing and Planning Department, and we do have a briefing for you on a variety of subjects related to vertical mixed use. So what we hope to cover today is a bit of the housing strategy and how this density bonus program fits into the bigger picture, some of the basics of what the vertical mixed use program is today, and covering the VMU-related direction we've received to date and our staff recommendation. There's also a long list of slides at the end that I won't be covering in this presentation, but that you can use for reference with some additional research and images of vertical mixed-use buildings in our community today. So I start with this slide to say that this is not a solution looking for a problem. We know that we have our Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint that directed us to create 135,000 new housing units by 2025 to keep up with our current population growth. And we also know that the market is not providing adequate housing for low-income and moderate-income people. We also know affordable housing is not equitably distributed throughout the city. And finally, we know that the cost to close that gap in low-income housing in Austin, at least in 2017, was estimated at over $11 billion. So this is not a problem that we really have the financial resources to fully subsidize. And so that's what leads us to look for other tools in our toolkit, which is somewhat limited in Texas, but that's why we rely on this kind of second tier or this additional tier of incentivizing housing, both affordable and market rate, through density bonuses, through fee waivers, and through our regulations. This is how density bonuses are highlighted. This is how that fits into how we plan to achieve those 135,000 units in 10 years. We use these density bonus programs really to try and target 30% MFI households up to 80% MFI households, and use our federal funding and local funding to try and get lower and deeper affordability for those lower income households, and up to over 100 and 120% of the median family income. Generally, the market is providing those units. And so I'm not going to linger on this slide, but this is to present sort of the overall picture of we have a variety of developer incentives throughout the city of Austin. Many of them are geographically specific, though. So you might know the Downtown Density Bonus Program, which has very specific boundaries that only apply in downtown. We have the East Riverside Corridor Regulating Plan, North Burnett Regulating Plan, the Transit-Oriented Development District. So all of these have density bonuses, but they're limited to very specific parts of our city. Vertical mixed use on this map is shown in red, and you'll see how it lines up and down most of our major corridors in the central city. The only programs that are applicable citywide at this point are Affordability Unlocked and Smart Housing, which is a fee waiver program and doesn't actually offer additional entitlements. Can I get next slide? And so this is zoom in on what those affordable housing incentive programs have actually produced without any public subsidies. We know that the most prolific programs to date are the University Neighborhood Overlay and the Vertical Mixed Use Program, which is what we're going to be discussing today. Could I get next slide? So to cover some basics of what is this program today, we know that VMU is a voluntary density bonus program designed to generate community benefits through the use of development incentives. This program was actually adopted back in 2012. It had a fairly unique one-time opt-in, opt-out process by which neighborhood associations and neighborhood planning contact teams were able to decide where they thought VMU properties should be eligible in their areas. They also were allowed to weigh in on what the appropriate affordability levels should be in their neighborhood. This VMU zoning was applicable along core transit corridors, which actually were put into the code before 2010. I think it was 2005, but they reflect the core transit corridors from that time in Austin's history. But also because of this inherent connection, we're connecting housing and services to transit through this program. The development incentives offered by vertical mixed use is improved flexibility for site development, which we'll dig into in just a moment. And some of those community benefits that we get are creating an enhanced pedestrian environment, regulating affordability, and trying to support a more sustainable development pattern. Could I get next slide? This is a lot of information, but this is trying to break down how VMU is actually applied. It's considered a combining district, which is layered on top of the base zoning on a piece of property. Austin has many different combining districts, so it's possible you can have a zoning string or a zoning text that looks something like this: CSMUVCONP. It's a bit of an alphabet soup there, but this is where vertical mixed use would fit into a program like that. So there's a table on the right that shows how many of our VMU zone properties actually have other combining districts applicable as well. Next slide, please. And so those site development standards that do apply for VMU sites, there's sometimes been some confusion, but the VMU program today does not offer additional building height. So the height is actually regulated by the base zoning district. So if you're a CS or commercial services zone, the base zoning height maximum is 60 feet. However, as has been a subject of discussion, compatibility standards can supersede the height of any property that has VMU zoning and the base zoning underlying. Impervious cover is also not at all changed by VMU standards. They will be the same as the base zoning impervious cover. However, VMU does offer incentives in terms of reduced setbacks, so you can build buildings closer together than you would otherwise, except for, again, compatibility standards can supersede here. No floor to area ratio limit. This is a bonus in the VMU program. However, we know that height and impervious cover still provide site controls on these sites. There is a slight error here on the reduced parking requirement. The reduction is up to 40% reduction, so you can get 60% of what would otherwise be required parking on a VMU site. That is the parking reduction offered by the program. VMU also offers a broader range of allowable uses. So VMU is most often applied on what would otherwise be solely commercial or office zones where you wouldn't be able to build housing. And because of the -V combining district, you're able to now build residential uses with participation in the bonus program. But it also starts to allow commercial uses in what would have otherwise been office-only zones. So you could have, for example, a grocery store, whereas before it could have only been offices. And the other element of the VMU site development standards I'll highlight here is that it requires a mix of uses. As the name suggests, there's a requirement for a first floor pedestrian-oriented commercial space, and there's a minimum of 1 floor of residential use required. Could I get next slide? So this is what the affordability policy in VMU looks like today. It is a 10% set aside for both rental and for sale developments. And that set aside is 10% of the total number of housing units in the project have to be set aside and income restricted for those households earning not more than, in the case of rental developments, 60% of the median family income or 80% of the median family income. And that varies by neighborhood depending on that initial opt-in, opt-out process. And for sale developments, it is a 5% at each affordability level. So 5% of the total units must be set aside as affordable to households earning no more than 80% of the median family income, and to 5% at 100% of the median family income. And I've provided some numbers in the charts on the side so you can start to look at what that looks like by number of people in your household. And then just to get a sense, these are some average numbers of what the affordable rents would be in these projects. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think the average market rate unit that we pulled that would be comparable was over $1,800 or $1,900. So you start to see the difference in these income restricted units. Next slide, please. And we included this slide so that we can be really clear about what the median income looks like when we disaggregate it by race. Austin has historically and continues to have a really substantial gap between incomes of folks who are white and Asian and folks who are Black and Latino or Hispanic. And so the median might run somewhere along the middle, but white households are typically making over $15,000 more than the median, and Black and Latino households are making, as much as $20,000 less than that median. Next slide, please. And so this is our overall summary of what the vertical mixed-use program can do for us today. Some of those opportunities look like our ability to create income-restricted affordable housing without requiring direct public subsidy. It also increases the housing supply of bonus market rate housing. It can improve transportation choice by locating housing and other services near transit, and it can support our climate equity goals for land use and transportation. However, given its voluntary nature and it has to be created, or it works through an incentive-based approach, and so it really only works in areas with high market demand. We also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, we know there are barriers to securing long-term affordable home ownership housing units through this program. We know that feasibility can be reduced by competing regulations in our code that can inhibit design and construction. And we also know that this program was not necessarily created with racial equity at the forefront at the time. So why we're here today is because we've received direction from both the Planning Commission and from this council related to the vertical mixed-use program. The amendments from the Planning Commission were related to the affordability requirements in the VMU program today. And so they were hoping to standardize those kind of variable affordability requirements that exist in the program today and lower them to 60% MFI for rental units and 80% MFI for homeownership units. The City Council direction from November 2021 directed an expansion of the VMU program through the creation of a new tier with a height bonus. And so I will discuss the staff recommendation related to these two pieces of direction. So the staff recommendation for the set-aside percentages and affordability levels are highlighted in blue here. So the amendments to the current VMU program were directed by the Planning Commission. They show that we're, as I mentioned, standardizing the affordability levels in the VMU, like Tier 1, today to be just for households earning no more than 60%, whereas today there's variability in 60 and 80% MFI depending on neighborhoods. For sale developments, the Planning Commission recommended standardizing those affordability levels to 80% of the median family income. This or clause here that says fee equivalent to 10% of total units is the staff recommendation, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And as for the VMU2, this is the new tier with the height bonus. Staff recommends maintaining a 10% set aside and lowering the depth of affordability to 50% of the median family income, or increasing the set aside rate to 12% and keeping the median family income cap at 60%. For sale developments, we recommend going to 12% set aside to household earning no more than 80% MFI, or again, having a fee equivalent, which I'll discuss next up. The reason why staff is recommending a fee in lieu for condominium developments is due to what we've actually seen in these programs where we're producing income restricted, we're creating homeownership units for low-income homeowners in predominantly market rate condominium developments. We know that these homeowners have faced significant barriers to actually securing the kind of long-term affordability and stability that these programs are supposed to create for them through rising homeownership association fees, which exist beyond the City of Austin's zone of control. We cannot regulate homeowners association fees, and property tax assessments have been really inconsistent and sometimes increasing at a rate that makes these homeownership units unaffordable to the low-income folks that we're putting into those units. And so these are not issues that are only facing folks in income-restricted housing, but because we know that this is happening in these programs, we would like to be able to direct those funds towards long-term affordable home ownership projects such as community land trusts, which is where staff would recommend directing these fees instead, because that's a program that, there's plenty of council direction at this time about the preference policy that can be applied through those units, but also the city has a lot more control over those units and can better guarantee the affordability and stability for those homeowners. I have here just a table that shows an example of proposed fees. These are not the fees that staff would necessarily recommend, but these were pulled from work that had been done during the draft land development code revision. And so you can get a sense of how we would like to move forward with this type of fee if council wanted to go in that direction. Staff is also recommending a series of additional provisions that would help to affirmatively further fair housing. Staff does recommend that these requirements would apply much more uniformly in all voluntary density bonus programs within the Land Development Code. However, since VMU is on the table at this time, staff have drafted these amendments so that they would apply to the VMU program. And we think that these types of provisions can help affirmatively further fair housing and help to create more inclusive, equitable outcomes for our community. And a couple of those that I would highlight here is source of income protections, which would ensure that these developments, new VMU or VMU2 developments, would not be able to discriminate based on a tenant's source of income. Specifically, that looks like housing voucher holders. And so by Texas state law, they are able to be denied housing at this point if you're a housing voucher holder. And so this would provide some degree of protection for those folks. And the other one I would highlight here is requiring a proportional bedroom mix. This does not exist in the program today, and so we have consistently received studio and one-bedroom units in these developments. And so having a proportional bedroom mix requirement might get us more multi-bedroom units in these types of developments. I bring this up here. This would be staff recommends that we get some additional direction to set a non-residential bonus area fee. So there is a provision in the code today that says there will be a bonus area fee for upper level non-residential space within VMU buildings. This fee was, however, never set by council. We've gotten a couple inquiries from developers at this point about this fee, and so we think, especially considering the potential for this height bonus, that this could become a more pressing issue in VMU developments where you could have substantially more office space above ground or above the first floor in these types of developments. And so we want to probably have that fee set in place soon. And additionally, it might be worth thinking about if council would like to give additional direction related to the amount of residential use that must be required in these buildings. Today, it is 1 floor is the requirement, and so you could see projects that are, 6 floors of commercial and 1 floor of residential. And if that is the intent of the council, then that might be what we see. But considering there could be potential for greater height in these programs, it might be something to think about. And this last section is just going to provide what you were just asking about, Councilmember Harper-Madison, about some visuals related to compatibility standards. So I've pulled in an assortment of visuals, some of which are from past work and some are more recent mock-ups, but I hope to walk you through a little bit of our compatibility standards today and then how they apply to the vertical mixed-use program. So overall, we get a lot of questions asking why do we have compatibility standards? And the purpose was to provide a transition between single-family homes or certain civic uses and more intense land uses. We also know that Austin's compatibility standards are some of the most restrictive in the country. So compatibility standards today can apply to sites that are within 540 feet of the property line of an SF5 zoned or more restrictive zoning district, or on properties that are adjacent to a lot on which a use, that's a land use permitted in an SF5 or more restrictive zoning district is located. And compatibility standards will definitely be touching on the height and setback limitations and visualizing those, but compatibility standards also require scale and clustering requirements, screening requirements, as well as some other design regulations. And we have some images here showing what compatibility standards look like in other cities. In Austin, this is a chart that you may have seen before. This particular chart only extends to 420 feet from the property line of a compatibility triggering property. And that's because for the intents and purposes of the vertical mixed use 2 proposal, that could only go up to 90 feet in height. So really the applicable distance is 420 feet from that single-family zoned property or single-family use. So you'll see that there's a 25-foot no structure zone. It can be smaller for sites that are also smaller, and it steps back after 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet at different rates. But we're going to visualize this in a couple different ways. But before we get there, you may have already seen this research that staff conducted, but we know that 41% of VMU zoned sites could build to their base height, that is their base height entitlement after compatibility standards are applied, and only 34% of VMU zone sites would be able to build to that bonus height that's with VMU2 height bonus under the new tier of the VMU program after compatibility standards are applied. So less than half of our VMU zone sites can even reach their base height entitlement because of compatibility standards. So this graphic, the numbers are not really going to be applicable to anything that we're discussing here today, but this was to sort of frame sort of the difference in the approach that under Code Next and the Land Development Code revision, there had been a lot of talk about having these transition areas. And so that would include a more medium density or missing middle type of housing between our single family neighborhoods and the corridor. And so you can see on the top how you're kind of stepping up across multiple parcels or across multiple properties to a height like the one on the top left on our corridors. The image on the bottom is, again, not pertaining to anything in particular. Those numbers aren't applicable here, but it does show what happens when we're putting the entire transition from our single-family neighborhoods directly onto that corridor-facing parcel. You start to cut into how much housing can be built on that particular site because now the entire step back is fully borne on the corridor-facing parcel. So I have one example to show to you all today. There's a link at the end of this presentation to an interactive mapping tool that we created to help visualize the impact of compatibility on vertical mixed-use projects or vertical mixed-use zoned sites. And so I have an example here today of some VMU zoning that is located at Koenig and Allendale and Burnett Road. So this is in north, sort of central West Austin. I believe it's District 5. And this is an Imagine Austin corridor. It's served by the 803 Metro Rapid. And here you'll see the black outlines on these parcels indicates that they have VMU zoning. Their base zoning is, most all of these are CS base zones. The lot depths here range from 180 feet. This top right parcel that's kind of highlighted at 180 feet is a CVS or a Walgreens today. This bottom right is 330 feet deep. It's kind of an angled property. And then this large site on the top left is 500 feet deep, and that is today an HEB shopping center. So I'm walking you through turning on different layers in that map tool that is publicly available. I'm just going to walk you through what it looks like as these compatibility standards apply. So these black and brown parcels now, or colors on the screen, correspond to where there's a property that would trigger compatibility. And so these are all single-family zoned sites or single-family uses around this particular corridor. Next to that, you would have this 25-foot no structure zone. And so you start to see that's the red where you could not have any structures on those particular sites. This pink now is showing that area that is up to 50 feet away from the compatibility triggering properties. And so it's highlighting in pink in that this whole area could now build to 30 feet maximum height. Building on that, you get to 100 feet away from your compatibility triggering property. You could build up to 40 feet max height across this entire area. Finally, there's a much larger jump from the 100 feet to 200 feet from a compatibility triggering property. And so now the area in blue here is showing where you could reach just 10 additional feet above that, which is 50 feet in maximum height. Bear in mind, this is not the maximum height per code for the base zoning district of CS. That's 60 feet, but blue here is showing now where you could reach 50 feet in height. And finally, this green area is showing where you could reach that base maximum height, which is 60 feet. So only the HEB parking lot area would actually be able to reach 60 feet because it is up to 300 feet from a compatibility triggering property. And so again, there's our lot depths in this particular example. And you can see how that corresponds to the different heights that they might be allowed to build with compatibility standards today. And there's a couple things I'll point out here. So you can see we're kind of seeing, it can be confusing. That's why we wanted to break this down, how you're seeing heights as a particular color, but we usually think of compatibility as a distance from a property. So I'm trying to show some different distances from those compatibility triggering properties. And something that you'll even notice here is the way that there's compatibility on the other side of Burnett, that's on the east side of Burnett Road, is actually triggering a height step back onto the HEB property, which is on the west side of Burnett. So it's crossing over the corridor and then triggering compatibility to limit the height further. In this particular example, there's only one project that has actually redeveloped since 2010 when the VMU program was adopted, and it did not develop as a VMU project. It developed as a large storage facility, convenience storage. So it's 3 feet in height, not 3 feet, 3 stories in height. And this is the only property in that particular area that has developed in that since 2010. So I think we already showed that graphic. The link here is to that interactive map tool where any member of the public can start to look at the impacts of compatibility today on the VMU program, and where they can look at where VMU zone sites are located, which projects have developed as VMU projects or other. If they developed but they did not participate in VMU, you can view that on this map as well. And I will leave it there. That is all for our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is very, very helpful. I appreciate it. I have maybe just one or two questions. Do you have available, I want to understand that the VMU program has been successful, and what we're talking about is making it much more successful. And I think what you're showing us around compatibility just shows what the possibilities are. Do you have that slide available that shows the number of units that have been built under VMU?
Yeah, if we could pull up the presentation again.
I think it's helpful to see that. And I know that, we don't know for sure because some of them are still in, this one. So I just want to point out to my colleagues that that the VMU program can be much more successful, and that's what we're working on now. Because if we relax compatibility in the way that Councilmember Vela is suggesting, that's one way, but relaxing it that way will get us some more, as well as allowing the 90-foot height will allow more too. But this is what we've been able to do so far under the existing program, because it's a program that's used. So the possible combined impact, that of course is that some of these are under construction and in planning. So bear that in mind. But so far, we've had, the potential for 73 projects, 15,700 units, of which 1,800 more than 1,800 are affordable housing. So the reason I wanted to point this out to folks is we're not talking about enhancing a program that hasn't worked. We're talking about taking a program that's been successful and shown us that it can be successful and making it that much more successful. I think that's important, because if it was a program that no one was using, then I wouldn't be the right vehicle to build on. But because it has been successful, I think it's a good vehicle to build on. So,
Councilmember, may I offer one more data point that we didn't include in this particular slide, but it's also that of all the development that has happened on VMU zoned parcels since 2010, we've estimated that about 34% of that development has actually been through the VMU program. So about a third of all development on VMU zone sites since 2010 has actually participated in the vertical mixed use program.
I think that's pretty good, don't you?
It is higher than some of our other, regulating plan areas specifically, but it is pretty low compared to for example, University Neighborhood Overlay or a downtown density bonus program.
Well, I do think you did show another slide that showed the two programs that were the highest in terms of being useful, and VMU was one of those. So I think it's just important for us all to acknowledge that we're building off a useful program, a successful program. I don't disagree, I don't think anybody disagrees that what we need to do is take this program and make it more useful by relaxing compatibility and by allowing more height. So the other question that I had for you was the staff recommendation. My substitute does have one important difference from this staff's recommendation that I want to talk about, and that is the level of affordability. So the staff recommendation was 10% at 50% MFI and 12% at 60% MFI, and I am proposing more. And the reason I'm proposing more is because I really think it's important for us to get affordable housing. And I'm thinking that when we combine, this VMU document was never intended to change compatibility. That was going to happen in another document, the other document that's item 66 that's being brought forward. But I do agree with Councilmember Vela that if we make at least some of the compatibility changes in this ordinance, we can get them going right away. It's not an either or. We'll also be considering item 66. But the point is that my thought is that we should push the envelope a bit more in terms of getting as much affordability as we can. And so what I'm suggesting is 15% at 60% MFI as opposed to the staff recommendation of 12 at 60%. And then I'm proposing 12 at 50% as opposed to the staff's recommendation of 10. So the difference is the staff is recommending 10, I'm recommending 12. Staff is recommending 12, I'm recommending 15. But I'm thinking that also at the time that you all were thinking about what to recommend, we weren't talking about changing compatibility. So now that we are talking about changing compatibility, I'm hoping that that is something that the staff might consider as a reason for pushing the envelope a little bit more. I think Councilmember Vela just asked one of our speakers, if we were to reduce compatibility, can you see pushing the envelope a bit more? And so I just think it's important that we do that because affordability is so important. So anyway, I know that y'all really thought hard about the recommendations y'all made in terms of affordability, but I also know that was not considering compatibility, so.
Chair, I've
thank
got
you.
my hand up too.
Oh,
Oops. Chair, that's all the questions I had.
okay. Councilmember Harper Madison, do you have a question?
I do.
And
Thank you,
Paige is
Chair, I
next.
appreciate it. So listening along and watching the presentation, it makes sense to me that relaxed compatibility and parking requirements are a good trade for higher affordability requirements. But I think what I heard was, or is it true rather, that the proposal raises the affordability requirement for all VMU2 projects, but only relaxes compatibility and parking requirements, regulations along the orange and blue lines? And if that is in fact the case, can you talk to me about the rationale for that?
So staff has not presented any compatibility recommendations at this time, so I'm not sure which particular proposal you might be referencing.
That's Councilmember Vela's proposal.
And I am also concerned with, where we're gonna hopefully immediately put some limits on compatibility and some additional parking reductions on the orange and blue lines. And I think that will offset the increased affordability requirements for
Maybe it's because mine is on.
for those areas. But there is, I think, a gap between when we, assuming that, it passes the way it is and 12% and 15%, then the rest of the city is not going to have today relaxed compatibility standards to help offset those. I am optimistic and hopeful that the working group proposal will come through and alleviate that kind of, mismatch where we're cranking up the affordability requirements without, giving them anything in return. But I think we are looking at potentially a little bit of a gap. And I don't know what the calibration is, and that's my only kind of concern in terms of, you know what I mean, like, we've gotten a lot of return, I think, off of the 10% affordability requirements in VMU. I mean, we were just talking about that. How does an increase without the compatibility? I think that's an open question right now. I think if we roll some compatibility limits in there, I'm less concerned about it.
Chair, if I may, my continued question there then would be, and I believe this is for you, Councilmember Vela, I worry that this could disincentivize the use of the VMU2 to develop outside of the rail corridors, especially if we require properties to go through a rezoning to have to receive that VMU2 designation. And I wonder if we've talked to anybody in the building community and maybe some of the folks that are here today to get a sense of whether there would be substantial interest in opting for VMU2 over MF6 if a complicated rezoning case is on the table no matter what.
Those are discussions that we've been also having with folks, and as the staff, and I thought that was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. There are substantial reasons to go with VMU beyond, like for example, the setback, the FAR limits. Like, there's a lot of good stuff in VMU. I think if people were kind of given that neutral, choice between VMU and the MF6, I think they go with VMU, just about every time. But there are, I think those are legitimate concerns. And to follow up on that, I'm not totally sure the map of VMU properties, because I know that although there was a lot of opt-in, for example, in District 4, I think the vast majority of my neighborhoods opted in District 4. But outside of that, I don't think there are a lot of, VMU zoned properties ready to go. So while I am concerned about that, I feel like the vast majority of properties are going to have to ask for the VMU zoning, in the first place. There's so few properties zoned VMU that I think that they're that, and I don't know the data on this, but my sense is that might be more of an academic discussion that, in reality, I think most people are going to have to come back to a council and ask for that VMU zoning.
Could I speak to that?
Wait, I know that Councilmember Ellis was next.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ellis.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. I know it's hard to see when there's presentations on the screen that we're here too. And I think Councilmember Chovo has also joined us. But the initial conversation today had begun was in regard to whether the properties that already have rezoning would be participating in a bonus program versus an entire rezoning process. And so given that the council direction that was approved previously did actually spell out that it was supposed to be an administrative approval, and any tract that didn't have a rezoning already would, have to come back through the full rezoning. And so I know some of the questions that I just have are, first of all, I think there was a motion made. I'm not prepared to second that today because I think this is a good conversation for us to have as an entire dais. And I know that we'll be having this conversation shortly as an entire dais. But I just probably want to ask some questions about what is the added cost and timeline between these two different choices, because one can be administratively approved, the other is an entire rezoning. Do we have any estimates on what it costs to do a rezoning to try to ask for a VMU2 if that's how the council decides to go? Is anyone there in chambers? Oh,
Sorry, good morning. Rosie Trulove, Director of Housing and Planning. We don't have an estimate on that. We can certainly see if that's a piece of information we can collect, but I don't have a number to share with you today.
Okay, that would be helpful, and I know you've got good team members that can help us track down that information. As we look through our zoning cases every 2 weeks for the council dais to approve, sometimes it's just surprising to me that these cases can take months or years, even after a first vote, for something to actually be approved. And I want to be mindful that the clock is ticking for housing, and there's people who are just seeing their rents go up, every time they see that renewal come through, and it's really getting to a point of pricing people out of even small apartments. And I just don't want to put us in a position like that.
Chair?
Councilmember Kitchen.
Yeah. So a couple of things. I want to make sure that we've got a couple of. That's what makes this complex, is we've got a couple of different issues that all intertwine. There's a compatibility. There's a level of affordability. Those are different issues than the approval process. So I hear what you're asking, Councilmember Ellis. I think that's a good question. I think it's important to point out, though, also that if a property is not zoned V right now at all, which most of the city is not, then it's a zoning case. So whether it's V1 or V2, under existing law, under the existing code, that's going to be a zoning case. There are relatively few number of properties that would go from V1 to V2 that you'd be treating, you might potentially be treating as in a different way. So that's one thing to remember. There's no by right for V at all. So going from V1 to V2, the only thing we're talking about here is existing properties, which, as Councilmember Vela pointed out, is not that many of them, and they're just in the central city. So there's that. The other thing is what I was trying to solve for by just saying it's a zoning case. I'm happy to listen to other solutions if folks want to propose other solutions. But what I'm trying to solve for is we have a requirement under the Acuna case to do notification and protest rights at some point in the process. And so my thought is that what we're doing right now is we're just making textual changes, so we don't have to worry about that right now, but we do have to consider it at some point in the process. So it seemed to me that the simplest way to do that is just treat VMU2 the same way we treat V now if you don't have V. But if there's another way to address that, I'm certainly open to listening, to what that approach might be. It's just that we don't have any choice. We have to address it at some point in the process. And it didn't make sense to me to try to address it now. It made sense to me to let's just do a textural change. And so, and just treat the VMU2 just like we treat any property now that's not zoned for V. So that's just the thinking behind it. I think you're asking good questions. I'm open to listening to other ways to do it. But the reason I put it in the substitute that way is because that's seemed to me the cleanest way. But again, if people want to suggest something else, I'm open to listening.
Any other questions?
Chair, I had a question about the presentation. I don't want to distract us from the particular conversation going on right now, but I do have a question for our staff.
Go ahead, Councilmember Tobo.
Thank you, I appreciate it. On the part of the presentation, I think it is slide 16, recommending the fee in lieu for condominium developments. Let me preface it by saying I have some concerns about this because we want to be encouraging affordable home ownership as well. I know that's certainly a goal of the housing department that we all share. But I want to talk about these obstacles, the proposed, the identified barriers. And I guess I want to talk about the second one first. So when this became an issue over at Mueller for the affordable units, many of us worked and lobbied and advocated for a different solution from the Travis Central Appraisal District. And they were able to come up with one. And I can't quite remember what that solution was, but it acknowledged that those affordable units, that there was, I think it had to do with the way in which those ownership unit agreements were structured, and that there was just a certain amount of increased equity that a homeowner could obtain from those units. So I guess I completely understand why it would be listed as a barrier, but we've got a great example here in the city of Austin where there was a fix that allowed for people to purchase those units over in Miller development, that has created homeownership opportunities and some reasonable return on investment of equity. And I would think we would want to encourage that through other density bonus programs. So there's that. And then homeowners association fees is something that I know is another conundrum, but it seems like there would be ways to navigate around that. And I know when we've had conversations before, I've suggested, like, what about coming up with what would be reasonable assessment for those affordable units, and then dividing up the additional cost among the other owners in that. And I understand that would mean different owners are paying different amounts, but if we want, the benefit is the benefit of having economically diverse communities accrues to everybody in there, those who are in the affordable units as well as those who are in the non-affordable units. And so I think that's one alternative. I do know that when we've reached out, we have some interest from the law school here, from a particular professor at the law school, to look at this issue more closely. Can you all hear me? I seem to be like frozen in a very...
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Okay, that's probably better, because on my screen, I'm frozen in this like really, really kooky looking position. Okay, I'm back again, I think. But anyway, I think there is some interest from a law professor over at UT Law to help us look at different alternatives. But again, for homeowners association fees, I would think there would also, some other kinds of efforts we might consider. But I guess I don't want those to be barriers, because we want to be encouraging those. So I just open that up to the staff to respond to, and particularly with regard to whether they looked at our units over at Miller as a possible path forward to navigate around this property tax assessment obstacle, as noted.
Good afternoon, council members. So I'm not certain that we specifically looked at Miller or Mueller, but I am familiar with the property tax assessment issues there. And I would say that is the lesser of our concerns. I think the larger one is the homeowners association fees, and our understanding at present is that those fees could not be divided amongst the other property owners unless we learn, something further. So our understanding is that we as the city can't really control the amount of those fees over time, and can't necessarily have those fees be split up amongst other owners.
And when you say we can't and they can't, is this because because there's some state laws related to homeowners associations that are regulating here?
We have looked, I can't cite anything. We'd need to go back and look at that, but we have discussed it with legal, yes.
So I think that this would be worthy of a conversation that we all have in executive session, maybe. I wonder one of the things that we're regulating is the overall cost of those units, right? It has to meet the city's regulations for what is considered affordable for them to be in compliance with the city program they voluntarily participated in. And so I would think then maybe we just need to restructure how we describe what costs go into that number, so that homeowners association costs have to be part of that overall cost to the owner. Does that make sense? If I'm in an affordable unit, the city is already regulating how much I can pay for that unit per month for this development to be in compliance. And so if that number has to include my homeowner fees as well, then that controls and makes sure that my homeowner fees is not going to be in excess, is not going to put me above that number that's an affordable number.
Councilmember, we do at this point incorporate an assumption of the homeowners association fees at the onset that is baked into what will become the affordable sales price for those units. However, that is an assumption at the onset, but we can't control what those fees do at year 2 or year 5 or year 20 in this long-term affordable program. And so that's the point. We can bake in an assumption on the front end, but we can't control it in the long term. And so as those costs rise, as the homeowners association agreements change over time, that's where the city loses our ability to actually protect and provide that stability for the homeowners that end up in those units, because that can change over time, and we no longer have that control.
Well, I know there are a lot of other topics that this committee is undertaking today. Let me just highlight that this is an area where I think we can both look to other cities and potentially look back again to Miller-Mueller. I am for some potential fixes on a couple of these. And again, we have an offer of some potential assistance from a great clinic here in Austin. And I hope that we can figure out some solutions here, because I'd hate to just turn our back on the opportunity to get some ownership units. But anyway, I don't want to divert us any longer from this topic here today. I know there's other stuff on the committee agenda. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think Deputy Director Mandy DeMayo did want to add something on that subject.
Okay.
I hope, this is Mandy DeMayo with the Housing and Planning Department. Councilmember Tovo, thank you for bringing all of these issues up. We are very committed to affordable homeownership. It is more complicated than affordable rental. We do have the mechanisms to secure the long-term affordability through a restrictive covenant, which is recognized by Travis Central Appraisal District. We worked in partnership with our friends over at Miller-Mueller as they aligned their restrictive covenant really with our restrictive covenant. The Miller scenario is a little bit, I'm not going to say easier, but they have a consolidated portfolio. And so they were able to shepherd all of their homeowners, or are in the process of shepherding their homeowners through the tax process, ensuring the reduced property tax assessment reflective of the long-term affordability. With scattered site long-term affordability in incentive programs, we have less of an ability to kind of hold all of those homeowners a little bit more tightly and to guide them through that process. But as Erica Leak and Sam Tetford mentioned, the larger question really is around the homeowner association, not just the HOA fees, but really what we see with condominium ownership in the long term are those special assessments. And the special assessments down the road create, frankly, an undue and uneven burden for our low and moderate income homeowners. And we've been in those situations many different times where they are unable to really absorb that increased cost. As Erica Leak mentioned, there are also some complications, and we'd be happy to bring law in, but complications with how the HOA fees are set per state law, but also with respect to when the condominium is initially financed. All of that is set long before we get to selling the homes or determining before we get into the picture. So it is complicated, it is worthy of trying to unravel, but because in the VMU program, there's such a small current focus on ownership. I think it's about 5% of the units right now, or 5% of the projects are really ownership. Most of them are rental. We just felt like we could better invest the fee in lieu through our community land trust program.
Thank you for that extended information. That's very, very valuable. I appreciate it. That makes me wonder whether we would be better off. I mean, I guess this is a question you've thought about, whether it would be better just having all rental in VMU, or whether we get enough fee in lieu to really invest it wisely in other places. I'd be interested in kind of the cost benefit there. But anyway, thank you so much. Thanks, Mandy. That was really useful.
Thank you, Mandy.
If Greg.
Mayor?
Yeah, staff, you said, I think, that 1/3 of all VMU zone tracks are participating in the VMU program? Something, there was a statistic like that?
Sorry, Sam Tedford. I think you might be referring to a statistic when we looked at all projects that had developed, like redeveloped, since VMU was adopted in 2010. So of all the sites that have VMU zoning, a small percentage of those have actually redeveloped since 2010. 34% of those that redeveloped actually participated in VMU, and the remainder, developed under either their base entitlements. I think the number was about 6% actually participated in a different affordability program, so Affordability Unlocked could potentially be applicable on those sites, and the rest participated. They just developed under their base zoning entitlements. So that's how I got to kind of a 34% participation rate.
Of VMU tracks that have developed, about 1/3 that have had the opportunity to go after the VMU bonus have opted not to.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, 2/3 opted not to.
2/3
1/3
opted not to, only
did
1/3
participate
did.
in VMU.
Okay.
Mayor, I can give you an example
So-
of that. Go ahead.
And that'd be great later, thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
So thank you for that. I just wanted to understand that better. I think we're all trying to figure out how to get the most out of this, and I really am looking forward to the conversation on how to get that, and I'm unclear now. On the conversation we were just having about on-site affordability, I think, Kathy raises, Councilmember Tovo raises a good point. Maybe what we do is to consider making it all rental. Because I'm concerned about people not choosing the home ownership because that is so hard. And certainly if we have people that could help us work through how to make that easier, at the law school or something like that, I'd be the first one to want to implement that. But in the absence of that, if we're trying to get it on site, maybe it's better to have it all rental. And then if we also set the rate at the right amount, I'm not sure, I wouldn't oppose the fee in lieu if it's not, as it's been historically, where it's become an inexpensive way to buy out of the affordability program. Don't want that. So we shouldn't be incentivizing people to not put it on site because there's a cheaper option. So if there's a way for us to calibrate it where the developer is indifferent, and maybe it's a choice that the staff makes and puts to the staff to decide whether in that particular location it makes sense to have it on site, or whether that particular location or the number of units, if there's only one or it's too few, it would be better to get the fee in lieu, and the fee in lieu was set at the appropriate amount. Maybe it ought to be an option that the city makes, where the property owner would be indifferent because the cost of the property owner would be the same. But if it's unworkable to do it, and it just seems like it is right now, I hate for us to double down on that until we could figure that out. I'm a little uncomfortable when we start choosing 10 to 12 or 12 to 15 because we're not calibrating any of those numbers. And once again, I would say out loud, we ought to be hiring somebody on staff who's designated on staff with a long background in underwriting projects, who's the person that we would trust, that the community would trust, rather than hiring consultants on the outside. That has always been difficulty for us. And we have so many things that require that work now. I would urge the manager to put in his budget the dollars to actually create that position full-time to help us with calibration issues. On the amendment issue, I'm still with the question, and I heard what you said, Councilmember Vella, with respect to whether you ask for a zoning case. When we originally did this back at the fall of last year, we said we wanted VMU to be able to get to VMU 2 by right. right? Just administrative. You know, if you're willing to give more affordability, you can get more height to that. So the concept of saying, well, let's make it into a zoning case, where you now have to go through a zoning case, was different than what we had originally tasked staff to do last fall. And I'm concerned about having a zoning case, because I think it provides a barrier and will involve giving people, well, just be, it's, VMU is used so infrequently now anyhow, only a third of the time and even at that, it's one of our best programs, but it's still used much less infrequently than we would like to have it being used. I think we have a better chance of making it used if it's stuff that happens by right. I understand the issue with respect to, that doesn't help us get to VMU tracts that don't have VMU. And maybe it ought to be that if you have VMU already, you can get VMU2 by right, but with a more relaxed compatibility. Or if you want to get involved in a potential petition process, you can do that, whether you have a V or not. And you have the option at that point of getting increased relaxed compatibility. And that way, someone who doesn't have V, who's getting in a zoning case anyhow, is already subject to getting a new zoning case. And someone who already has V and would be willing to just do it as a matter of right has the option of whether to turn it into a zoning case or not. Might be a way to deal with that. But I would like to see on the blue and the orange line, especially increased units and the like. So I don't know if maybe that might be a sweet spot that's kind of a combination of both what we had asked for November and what Councilmember Kitchen's asking for, and your amendment might be a place that might work. I don't know.
I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting. It sounded like it might have some possibility, but the problem that I'm trying to solve is a possibility in the sense that, so Mayor, I think what I heard you say was that perhaps VMU2 is available by right, except that if you want greater compatibility, you might have to go through a zoning case. That might be something you could do, but I don't know that that's even necessary. But it doesn't solve for the problem that I was trying to solve for. I agree, we started down this road saying just administratively you could get to V2. And the problem that I was trying to solve for was not what the developer wants to do, but to respond to what was required of us in the Acuna case. So if you have another way to solve for that, I'm certainly interested in hearing it, I was just putting the zoning case on it because that would solve for it.
Yeah.
But remember, we have to, under Acuna, at some point in the process, there has to be notification rights and protest rights. And if we're not going to do it up front, which I don't think we should, I think we should just make text changes without doing that, and then just do that when we're affecting a piece of property. That's what I was thinking. But I'm not arguing that that's the only way. If there's another way to do it, I'm certainly open to listening. But we have no choice. We have to respond to the Acuna case. So that's what I'm trying to solve for. It's not. That's the only thing I'm trying to solve for. It's not. It's not anything other than that. And I don't want to get the issue of compatibility confused with the issue of whether it's by right or not. Because I think the compatibility that Councilmember Vela is proposing is really important to do, and it's immediate, and I think we should do it. And I don't think that has anything to do with whether or not this is administrative or by right, or whether it requires zoning. I don't want to confuse those two things, because there's different things we're trying to solve for.
Colleagues, we have this room till 5 o'clock.
Sorry.
And it's
Sorry.
4:36.
Sorry, Chair.
And there's still a couple more briefings, so
Okay.
I suggest that if y'all want to take action on this item, it has been made and second, then we can do it unless someone really has a question on the issue itself that we're discussing. I would ask if we can go ahead and either postpone the vote
Okay.
or make the vote, but it has been seconded.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We could probably talk all day on this. So I just made a motion in case there was consensus on the committee. So I don't know how my colleagues feel about it.
Do you feel comfortable taking a vote?
Chair, I mean, I understand the concerns with the by right versus, and honestly, the participation rate that I was not aware of, that, raises some concerns. But I think that it will be going before, regardless, it will be going before the full council, and we can, talk about all those issues. But I think as a overall kind of approach, I do support it, and I would be happy to send it to the full council with, hopefully a unanimous support.
Chair, can you remind me who seconded it? I just wanted to make sure that my comments weren't construed as seconding.
No, I second it.
Councilman Vela seconded.
Councilmember Vella?
With
Okay.
the- And
I'll be
and
abstaining on the
accepted the
vote, but-
friendly amendment also, so.
Yeah, I accepted.
I continue to have concerns, most especially as it pertains to zoning in particular, in which case I would prefer that we hold off on taking action and discuss it further. But I understand if my colleagues would like to move forward with the vote.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and vote. You can vote it for, let's take the vote. All those in favor of the amendments to, related to the vertical mixed use, which we call V2s, raise your hand if you approve. Okay, that's 3, Councilman Vela, Councilman Kitchen, and the chair. Those are against or want to abstain?
I will abstain, Chair.
Okay, and we have 2 abstaining members, Councilman Ellis and Councilmember Harper Madison. So it moves on forward to the council, full council next week. Before we leave, before we go into the next